Welcome back to Strategy Immersion Training. We're now in week 3 of the immersion training, and if you're not in the training, welcome back, or welcome to the first time attending one of our special deep dive trainings into some of the finer points of being a strategy coach. So tonight we're going to cover, today, whenever you're watching this, we're going to cover something really special. Why do people change? And today I was thinking about what we were going to work together on, and it dawned on me that I've been covering so much in terms of nuts and bolts approaches for actually how to cause transformation in your client, how to get them to actually alter their mindset or their mood or their emotion or the way they look at a particular situation, that I needed to take some time with you to kind of step back, especially when it comes to some of the more advanced, kind of higher levels of mastery when it comes to helping your client or supporting your client, your coaching client, in altering their state of mind. So last live stream, if you watched it, and I'll put a link up if you haven't after we're done today, we covered higher levels of working with a client on transforming their mindset. And so we covered more indirect, more elegant, more intentional and yet not hands-on approaches to causing your client to change their state of mind. And of course, even before that, we talked about how those were the keys to the kingdom for your client, because no matter what they want in their life, no matter what they want to experience in their life, it's all based in mindset. If you don't have the mindset for it, it doesn't matter what you know, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. There are people with the best circumstances that are miserable, and there are people with the worst circumstances and assets and knowledge and education that do tremendously well eventually, and or they feel phenomenal all the way through that process as well. So the difference in people is not their biography or their story or their background or even their knowledge. The difference in people is not their circumstances or their friends. The difference in people is their mindset. It's an inside out type of game. So today we're going to cover why people change, but I'm going to simplify it here into kind of an overall gestalt for change, so that you can actually apply your understanding that you can bring from this little mini training here into your conversations with your coaching clients for a bigger picture approach and understanding as to what do I need to be doing with my clients and how do I actually cause that change to occur just in 1 or 2 conversations. So that's what we're going to cover today. Now, to explain this, I'm going to give you an example or two first, because I think these will help you bring it into reality rather than just guessing at models and concepts and things like that. And we'll get to that as well. But there was a student of Master Coach University who went through immersion trainings over a decade ago, and his name was actually Jeff as well. And Jeff was he was a teacher. He was in the service profession as well, at a very high level, and I really thought he was doing immaculately. In fact, about 2 months after he went through training with us, he was making $4,000 or $5,000 a month with his clients, with his coaching clients that had hired him over that period of time. And so I said, wow, Jeff, you're doing phenomenal. This is amazing. He invited me to one of the classes that he teaches, and we kind of co-taught some things together with his students. He was a teacher at a local university, and I mean, this guy just had it going on. Still to this day, he speaks in front of groups of thousands of people, works with some of the top influencers, top leaders, top seminar gurus in the world. And at the time, I talked to him in a kind of a side conversation after we had taught something together, and he said, Jeff, I used to be a criminal. And I looked at him. I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? I mean, you're this phenomenal professional. You're this consummate leader and communicator. Like, how is it that you used to be a criminal? And he said, yeah, I mean, when I was, earlier on when I was a student, I was in school, I used to steal things from people's cars and houses and backpacks and whatever. And I used to sell it, to my friends, make some side cash, and, I did a lot of drugs, and he went on and on and on and into this whole, other lifestyle that he had lived, prior to me knowing him. And it reminded me of a friend that I had in high school as well. We used to do a little bit of drugs together as well, different kinds of deviant behavior. I'm sure that we would consider it that way at the time. But not too long ago, probably 6-7 years ago, I was doing a live stream at an ICF event, and I noticed that he was watching. And I was triggered to remember that, gosh, I just friended this guy on Facebook like a couple months ago, and I hadn't talked to him for like decades since my time with him, right? His name was Dan. And so, like I said, Dan and I used to have some very exciting times together when we were young, and did some things that I'm sure I would never find myself doing again, all sorts of things that could have landed us probably in jail. And here I find him on Facebook, and I see that he's watching one of my live streams. And so I went back, and I just had a chance to look at his profile and kind of catch up, kind of trigger, because I was triggered to think about him. And all of his profile information, it was like him in a suit and tie, and he's holding all these professional positions in his life right now. He's got a family, and I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking about my memory of him, and I'm like, this is the same person? Because I remember Dan was, a real crazy guy. He was kind of led the charge in doing everything that our parents had told us and warned us never to do, or we die or go to jail or wreck our future or something like that. And I realized it was the same individual, and so it went going from somebody who enjoyed smoking a variety of different substances on a Tuesday afternoon with me, and to somebody who's holding down a tough job and taking care of his family. And so, by the way, the explanation most people will say is something like, well, people grow up, we get families, we have obligations, you have to kind of mature over time. And I mean, okay, I'll buy that. That's one explanation. But I also wanted to know, because these individuals had changed, right? There's just the individual I just mentioned. You might even think of people that you see on Facebook now, and you knew them back in the day, and they look like a completely different person, right? They have a whole different life. Or people that you still know, and they're a whole different person. Like, you can't even imagine them being the same person that you knew 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? Or you might even apply that to yourself. So people, we know, we have experiences of this. Maybe not every individual we've ever met, but we have experiences of people changing, right? Even ourselves sometimes, believe it or not. So I'm trying to answer this question: why did that happen? Like, why did people change? And the simplest way that I could put it is that something happened between the time that I knew that individual and now, or between the time that you were one way and you were this new way, even if it was years and years and years, right? So what happened is what I want to know. And I'm going to give you some simple ideas. What happened, the simplest way I could put it, is that someone who at one point called themselves a criminal, that was their, ID is just a shorthand for identity, right? They had an identity of a criminal, and now their identity is they're a father, right? Now, there's some people that grow up and, they're no longer criminals and they don't have kids, right? They're still single, let's say. And yet those individuals, maybe their identity before was, well, I'm young and now their identity has changed to I'm old, right? So what they do now is more consistent with an identity of explaining, well, I've grown up, I'm old, versus young. Was there maturing happening here? Well, possibly. A lot of people that didn't happen, even if they're no longer a criminal or doing drugs, right? But they go from the identity of young to old. That's what happened. They're the same person. They're the same person that was doing the crazy stuff as they're the person doing all this responsible stuff right now. They've identified themselves differently within themselves, outwardly, other people, the way they see them. It's just an identity. So I'll give you the other example I mentioned was Jeff from 10 years ago. I met him when he was a teacher, but at one point he had the identity of a student. And in his mindset, students can steal stuff and break the law and do drugs and do all the deviant stuff that he was doing, right? You might be in the identity of a follower, like, hey, I'm following this and this and this, and I'm learning. I'm maybe a student as well. And then soon, hopefully, you transform into a leader, right? But we all have these different ideas of who we are, who we believe ourselves to be. Another way of putting that would be identity. And the fact is that what really happened is somebody changed the big picture of how they constructed themselves. And as a result of that, you and I see them as a different person, even though there's so much that's the same in them probably. And in fact, they even see themselves as a different person. One of the things that you may know as a student at Master Coach University that we do in many of our trainings, especially immersion trainings, is we work with you on you creating yourself as the identity of a master coach. You constitute yourself with that identity, right? And so we call you coach, you call yourself coach, and then you do all these coaching things, right? Most of the students that enter into our immersion trainings, they don't think of themselves even as a coach, much less a master coach, right? But through experiences of doing phenomenal coaching with their clients and seeing that their clients scored them well and rated their coaching as amazing and really masterful, and they see the life changes that those clients actually undergo as a direct result of the coaching that happens and all the other stuff that we do in order to actually have them feel like we expect them to be a master coach, and you call yourself coach, etc., they start creating that identity. I know that when I first was in training with Tony Robbins and I was going through all the work to try to come up with that best coaching session that I could provide, the hot question to ask, or the direction I could take a client in so I could perform well and get the job, I definitely didn't think of myself as already a master coach. By the end of that training, though, because of experiences I'd had, the context I was in, and what I had decided and started to believe in within myself, I actually felt like and actually started to say, hey, look, I'm a coach now. Maybe not, it wasn't saying I was a master coach yet, but 30 days in, I felt like I knew what I was doing as far as coaching goes, right? Now, over the following year or two, after coaching hundreds of people, I felt, hey, I've got some mastery of this. And after 2 decades later to today, I know I'm a master of many different facets of coaching. I could easily call myself a master coach, right? And it's not just a thing that I would say, right? It's a feeling I have. It is a mode, a zone that I can get myself into, right? It's something I have experience and proof about for many, many years and thousands of sessions, but it's also something that can show up at any moment. Now, if I go have dinner after this, I'm not like a master coach eating dinner, right? Like that's not the identity I take on in that moment, but the right context that would trigger me to take on certain identities, certain modes, certain ways of thinking about myself and the process that I can take people through, that master coach identity shows up, even if I'm not conscious of it. Does that make sense? Have you ever had the experience like that where it's like you just suddenly start reacting to moments and you react in a way that constitutes you as something beyond who you used to be. Whether you're conscious of it or not, it's just a matter of time. If certain things occur in certain magnitudes, at certain amounts, if you will. Make sense? So the point is, identities change, and there's certain macro elements of our mindset and the way we think and feel about things that really are why people actually do truly change, and change for the long term, not just in a momentary eureka aha moment in a coaching session. Does that make sense? So to go further on this, because this is just kind of the simple piece of it, did they really change? And I think what I was saying just a second ago is kind of they didn't. I mean, they're still kind of the same person, but there's aspects of them that are radically different, right? So I don't know that I could answer this question yes with most people, at least in a concerted period of time. So a better way to put it in terms of like these identities could be something like, well, who they are didn't change. Like I didn't change from a criminal to a student, or I'm sorry, a criminal to a father, right? But I might say something like this: how I occur to myself is whatever the new identity is. So I think of myself differently. It doesn't mean I truly am different. Like my DNA is not different, right? I still have the same cells in my body for the most part, right? Or at least they've been replaced within a same kind of general pattern. But I think of myself differently. I see myself differently. I occur to myself in a different way, right? And so therefore, I'm going to talk about myself differently. And because that conversation is different, I am that conversation in a way. It's a reflection of who I believe myself to be, how I occur to myself. And again, nobody's going to say this, oh, how I occur to myself is, like, nobody says that, right? They might say, I see myself like this, or I'm this kind of person, or this is just me, right? But you get it, you get the idea. Another way you might say it, or another way to kind of mechanically think about that identity change might be, I've organized myself as. So my friend, Jeff, could organize himself, my student as well, Jeff could organize himself as a criminal, or he could organize himself as a leader, right? Or a professional. And depending on how he's organized, now he could probably very quickly access the criminal in him. In fact, I had some experiences with him where he actually did access the criminal in him. He broke a bunch of rules and policies in my organization, and we had some challenges. I had to actually bring those up. So maybe a little bit of the criminal was still there. But the point being, he organized himself predominantly, like overall, the center of gravity had radically changed for him over the years. I just hadn't seen that change. He'd made those changes before he came to the point where he went through training with my organization. So these kind of little conversations, how I see myself, how I occur to myself, I've organized myself as, these are just mindsets. So I don't know that I changed from a student of coaching and somebody who wanted to be a coach to a master coach, or if my friend went from, kind of a slacker student to a professional, or my ex-student went from a criminal to, a professional or a leader or a teacher. But he certainly did occur to himself differently. Those individuals occur differently today. They've organized themselves differently. They're organized in a different way, the way they organize who they are, themselves. And that's just a mindset. That's really all that changed. So when we say, hey, how do people change? Really the better way to ask that question might be, how does somebody change their mindset such that they occur differently to themselves in the world, such that they become a different person, the way they are reflected in their experience of the world, in who they become in life? Does that make sense? Let me know if you didn't, or if it doesn't make sense, any confusion about this, hit the chat. I'm happy to answer questions. That's why we do these live. Give you another example. This one is very recent. As a coach that's on my team, we are working together to produce really high-level content for his students, his clients, and we're actually going to be giving this content away on some of our channels as well, so you'll see some of it. And some of you actually might even be working with Chris. So Chris and I are really partners in a deep dive content work that we've been doing for almost a year now. I think over a year now, actually. Yeah, it's been over a year at this point. We're getting really good at it. And early on, Chris would say things like, because we just started doing what I call sprints, which is where you have only a week to get a bunch of stuff done and you kind of sprint to the finish line. It's a really great way to kind of organize actions within a team and develop products and kind of move things incrementally to another level in what's called an increment, basically. And you do it within what they call a time box, like a box of time. And so we started doing these sprints, and in the first, 2, 3, 4 sprints, Chris was saying things like, well, I'm not getting paid for this, so I'm kind of just volunteering my time to do this. And he would say things like, well, I have to make my calls, so I couldn't get the stuff done that we were supposed to be working on. Or he would say things like, you know what, I have higher priorities I got to get to today, and I'm not going to be able to make progress on this right now. These kind of conversations you might hear when you're working with a client that's really trying to make a change in their activity or their behavior or how they operate or their life for that matter, any area of their life for that matter. You might hear these kind of things, like you call them excuses, right? Like, that's just an excuse. You're saying you got other things to do, right? But when I heard Chris saying those, I appreciated it because he works in sales in my organization. He's also a coach. He's got other things to do. He's got other roles to play that are actually quite critical. And so, I didn't have an issue around it. But what was really interesting is fairly recently, like a couple months ago, we had just finished a project, a content project, a video that he needed to shoot. And, he stopped me for a second because we were kind of applauding some really great work on his part and really all our parts. And he said, Jeff, this is really, I see this as my primary role now. I got to do sales, and that's kind of keeps the company alive and keeps money rolling in and keeps clients coming in. And I got to run my coaching sessions, and, that's still important. But you know what? I'm much more a content creator now. I shoot videos, and that's what I do. That's who I am as a creator now. And that's my number one role here at JTS Advisors and Master Coach University. And, I didn't really think that hard about it at the time, but, talking about what we're going to talk about today, it came to me that, wow, the change that I saw in like a friend of mine in 20 years, or that I didn't see in a student when he talked about his past, just happened for one of my team members in less than a year. And I wasn't like coaching him. I'm not trying to, obviously I was advising him throughout this process, and we spent probably 100 hours together in support and conversations. So I suppose there were probably some influencing conversations that took place, some coaching that I offered and things like that. And obviously I gave him my mindset, right? And possibly he looked at some of those ideas as, kind of modeled them as a role model, so to speak, because I've created content for a decade and he's been creating content for maybe a couple of years, right? So speaking of mindset, speaking of identity, I already had that identity and I had references to back it up that I can offer him, right? As a trainer, leader, mentor, manager, etc. And then obviously our organization grows as a result of me kind of getting him to step up, so to speak. But the bottom line is, however it came about, now he's different. He's a different person. He's not saying the kind of things he was saying, when he first started, about how he doesn't get paid for this and how he's got to go make some commissions and how he's got to go make his sales calls. That stuff is not coming up anymore, at least as like a clear excuse for why he's not actually operating in this other role, because now he sees that other role as the primary role. So he just changed his identity. He could easily have said, how I occur to myself now as a content creator, not just a coach and a salesperson. I've organized myself as content creator. They did that unconsciously, probably more than anything, but it came up consciously in this conversation, right? So, if you've ever met, like a salesperson, you know they have a very particular mindset, right? They kind of go for the jugular, and they're closing, and they're trying to find a way in, and they got to move on to the next call or the next meeting because they're kind of chasing the next commission, so to speak. And somebody who's like a writer or author or a teacher, speaker, not the same thing. Not saying that somebody can't be both at certain times, but I saw this change happen with Chris, and it's like it's a really different person that's showing up now. So I'm going to actually show you this map, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to that conversation I just started with you around Chris's transformation that I've noticed. And some of the different aspects of this model, I'm actually going to map it to what I see that has happened for Chris. So we can kind of all learn something around what's the big picture of how people actually change, no matter how that actually occurs. And there's two different directions that you can go in. So I know this is kind of a little bit of a funny picture here. Think of this as like an octopus, right? And so, you've got your octopus. I don't know. I'm sure there's some kind of beak here or something like that, right? But the octopus has these two obvious parts, right? If you've ever seen the anatomy of an octopus, there's this head section here, and then there's the tentacles, right? All the, the 8 whatever tentacles. And it's very obvious, if you've ever seen an octopus, that the head is not a tentacle and a tentacle is not a head, right? They are two very distinct and separate parts of that animal's anatomy, so to speak. Now, the reason I kind of painted this picture here is because you can think of your client's kind of anatomy of the way they might change as coming from these two separate parts. You can change from the bottom up by changing the tentacles, so to speak, of the octopus, or you can change from the top down by actually kind of cutting the head off the monster, if you will. Now, my old mentor, Tony Robbins, used to say, you know what, you can change all the tentacles, but if you don't change what's at the root of everything, you don't change the head of the monster, the tentacles will always grow back. Now, I don't know about octopus, if the tentacles will grow back on an octopus or not, but I've seen it again and again, that particular explanation that came from Tony in clients and in other people as well. People try to change a behavior, they try to change like one little appendage here, and the head always ends up dictating what the tentacles are going to do. I mean, that's the head's job, right? That's where the brain is. It's kind of the control center, if you will. So let me give you kind of an overall map of this anatomy of change, if you will. And then we'll go back to Chris's story and map some of his tentacles and then the head onto this model. So in the head, think of this as kind of the big picture control mechanism, okay? And so this is where identity lies. Like who I am is in the head. Like whoever I am, it's going to control and offer kind of commands to the different tentacles of, actions and different things that the tentacles might do for the head. This is like the master. It's a top-down type of program. So the identity commands the rest of the system. Global beliefs. We talked about this last week. If I have a global belief about the world or women or men or money or business or talking to people, communication, whatever, like it's just some general aspect of life that everybody's got to deal with, that's going to give a massive command to my nervous system as to how to operate in almost every area of my life. All the tentacles are going to change based upon those global beliefs. Also, my context, which for the most part is constituted by people and places. Like if I'm surrounded by a particular peer group and that peer group thinks of me a certain way, then I'm going to that's going to impact my global beliefs, my identity, and that is going to, again, command how I operate, at least within that particular context. And now, by the way, some people will go to work and that's a very separate context for them. But most people have a general context of people and places for that matter, where they keep going back to again and again and again. Most of us are not nomads when it comes to people and places. So the way that people see you and the way you see people, the way the places actually mold your behavior and mold your identity and beliefs about whatever, those are very much in the head of the beast, so to speak. And they will be kind of put together and constructed into a general kind of blueprint for life or a battle plan for life that'll have you operating differently. Now, in the tentacle side of things, think of this as the ground level, like where the rubber hits the road. This is like the actual, where the battle plays out, so to speak, right? So actions, actions I take are tentacles, right? So if you coach your client just to take an action, that's just a tentacle, right? If the head doesn't change, the tentacle will eventually snap back and the action will probably go backwards. Contextual beliefs, so beliefs about something very specific like work or this particular business or my client, something that's more of a narrow focus in terms of the context. Contextual beliefs. Values, like one thing's more important than another, right? Like that's going to be a tentacle because we'll only apply that value in various contexts, in various areas, and that value set or that hierarchy or priority set, that's going to be driven by who you are. That's going to be driven by the way you see the world, people and places. I mean, if you haven't noticed, the values in Western society are probably different than the third world or different than maybe the Middle East or something like that. So different values, it's not just because they were had different DNA that they have different values in a different place. That place has different people. Those places and people get constituted into beliefs and identities. And guess what? That filters down into a tentacle called values. Short-term focus. What you decide to focus on in the short term, that's a tentacle. And it's going to actually generally be dictated by the head, right? So you can coach your client, and there's nothing wrong with this. You can coach your client to change their short-term focus, to change their actions, to change their contextual beliefs, to change their values. What's most important, right? And you will change one or more of these tentacles, but don't be surprised if your client snaps back and the action or the belief or the value that you asked them to take on doesn't last. The reason is because if you don't cut the head off, like Tony Robbins said, eventually those old tentacles that you thought you changed, they always grow back. So, there's no perfect direction to do this in, but there is a typical set of issues that'll happen when you attempt to change somebody from the bottom up. If you change somebody from the top down, you help them change who they are, their global beliefs, the people and places, and the way they think about those aspects, their general context, all this stuff can change. And not just change now, it can change forever. Because once you change an identity, chances are you don't go back to the old identity. My friend or my student, who was a teacher and a leader, never really went back to the criminal, even though he had a little piece of that criminal in him, right? Once you make progress in these areas, you don't tend to backpedal. These have a certain level of sustainability in them that is quite powerful. They're more challenging to change sometimes, depending on the technique and the approach. Although we covered a lot of techniques around changing identity and global beliefs last week. And of course, if you're in training with us, we've got a lot more detail there that you have probably already followed up on. But the bottom line is, you change any of these elements change, and they usually change forever. So usually there's a top-down game. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Now, that said, sometimes people are not ready to change from the top down. They're going to reject your idea that they have a different identity, right? And now there's different individuals that will operate more from the bottom up. In that case, yeah, you're probably going to need to help them over time change actions, short-term focus, contextual beliefs and values. Now I'm going to give you an example of what that might look like in a client that I worked with over the last couple of years in just a little while. We'll get to that, I promise. Okay, so now let's map what we just talked about to this shift that Chris made going from salesperson to content creator. Can you see this? Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure it's on the screen. So Chris was just salesperson, now he's a content creator. Different identity. So this identity shifted, right? But what had to happen in order for that to occur? I mean, and again, like I said, I didn't really coach him. I gave some examples and some ideas and beliefs to decide if he wanted to buy into them or not. So he altered a lot of tentacles over time. So, you know, he's now as a content creator, he's doing research. Whereas before, he used to be, you know, very neurotically checking email, right? So different activity between salesperson and content creator. You know, before he was chasing after dollars, and now he works for free. Right? He creates content and he doesn't get paid to create the content, right? So very different way of looking at what he needs to do with his day and how money actually gets generated in the business. You know, now he's making videos, and before he would just, here, I'm going to go to the other side here for a second. He would just make calls. Right? Big difference here between those two. So notice, by the way, the conflict here between free and paid work, or let's say making videos and making calls. Like, you can't make videos and make calls at the same time, right? There's conflict. Conflict all over the place, especially on the money and the time side, right? So he was making these changes way before he changed his identity. By the way, that's one of the reasons, chances are, why it took like a year for him to be at the point where like these conflicts don't occur anymore. He's gotten a clear hierarchy that he's the content creator first and a salesperson and a coach second and third, right? So it took time and habit to kind of build that in, so to speak. But people, like, I'm working with him at a different level, and places, and you know, he's got a studio now where he makes the videos. And then I've worked with him on all sorts of beliefs about how clients show up. They come from content, not just chasing them down. And then finally he came up with his identity. So that's an example, I think, long term, of course, took quite a while, but change that occurred from the bottom up. He started with all the tentacles and eventually kind of grew a new octopus head, right? So used to be a salesperson, now content creator. So he had to change actions. He had to change his short-term focus just to go through the sprints that we had worked together on. He had to change certain contextual beliefs and certain values at times. And that was a real fight for him to do some of these things. And eventually over time, after getting reinforced for that over time and seeing videos come out and clients come from those videos, different identity. So we've got the head and the tentacles, and now for Chris, the head and the tentacles have changed, and you have a whole different person. You have a different individual with, I mean, you might call it a professional role, but role, identity, I mean, it's not a huge difference one way versus the other. So does that make sense? You got any questions about this? I mean, let me know, because this is kind of the big picture. You want to think of your client. I know it's a little bit of a mess now, but think of your client as this octopus with these tentacles, and their tentacles are ones that you as a coach are going to kind of chase after. You know, you're going to, oh, there's an action. Oh, there's a contextual belief. Oh, there's a, you know, kind of all the milling around with the minutia. And what you can do to make change really happen more simply, sometimes more quickly, more effortlessly, and in a more long-term fashion is focus on the head. Focus on these elements, the identity, the global beliefs, and the context that your client is in. That makes all the difference in the world. So as another client that I worked with and I'm not going to make these labels on this one, but I've worked with her probably for 3-4 years now. And when I first started working with her, I was trying to work with her on the head. I was like, oh, you could become this different person. And, what about beliefs about money or yourself? And just all these different elements that I was working with her on a more of conceptual and kind of a really high level. And she'd reject all of them. She'd just get really neurotic and kind of grouchy. And she would just go into these states of mind, contextually speaking, that totally did not allow her to maintain any kind of consistent change in identity and global beliefs, etc. And so I said, you know what? I've done the best I can on actually changing her from the top down. I guess we better work from the bottom up. So I worked with her for several years, and I had her set goals. I had her take specific actions towards those goals. She had some deadlines she set, and to go public with certain things, she had a performance she had to run at a certain time. And so she had all these actions, short-term focuses, micro beliefs and values, contextual items that she was doing differently here and getting reinforced for those things throughout, a long period of time. And now, even though she never came to me with a eureka, like, I'm this different person. The other day I had a coaching session with her, and she was asking me all these questions about like, I want this and I want this, and I'm struggling with this. And, but she was in a really different state of mind than I had ever heard her before, without really kind of pushing her to get into that state, without kind of like manhandling it by direct manipulation, as we talked about last couple live streams. And so I was talking about the concepts that she was discussing, things like that. And then finally I just said to her, you know what? I think Sally, let's call her Sally. Her name's not Sally, for sake of confidentiality. Sally, you've accomplished so much over the last couple of years. And even though when we started working together, you didn't think any of that was possible, and you didn't even have goals, and you were just a static character in your story, and you didn't think anything was going to ever change for you or ever happen for you, even though that originally seemed to be the case, that's not the way you think anymore. That's not who you are anymore. You're somebody that can make things happen. You're somebody that knows what's possible. You're somebody that has the ability to do things that are really tough for her, that she has resistance around, and yet push through and make it happen anyway. That's who you've become, if you haven't noticed, over the last couple of years. And so I'm just here to tell you, it's like you've done all these amazing things, and that's awesome, but you're not the same person that you were walking into working with me. And I just wanted to mention that even though that stuff is now in the past, because you've now done those things, and really we're here to talk about the future, who you're going to become going forward. The fact that those things were accomplished in your past is proof of who you've become. It's a proof of what's possible. And it's a proof of the new places that you have gone to and the people that you've touched. Again, I'm changing the words a little bit to fit here. But the work that I did with Sally in that session, she stepped away with a whole different way of thinking about herself, a whole different way of feeling about herself, and a whole different sense of possibility, because now, even though we started with all these little tentacles and there was a lot of push and pull and some struggles there, she's now gotten to the point where the head is now different. She now has a different identity, a different sense of herself than ever before. And yeah, she'll tell you, well, that's because of what I've done. And I would go so far as to say that it's not because of that, but it made it easier to cause this to transform when she had all these elements that were lined up. By the way, just like if you have this lined up, it's a lot easier to change these. But vice versa, like if you've got all these tentacles, like let's say I'm a grown-up, professional that works really hard and takes care of my family, and I'm loyal and mature, but I stay out all night, doing drugs, drinking, and carousing, and I've got all these tentacles that go against this identity. this identity is in danger. Because these tentacles, if you haven't noticed in people's lives, in fact, we probably see them in our own at times, these tentacles can grow to the point where suddenly they infect our identity. They can kill the head. I'll give you one example from my own life. I look at myself as a productive business owner that's really responsible. And so, every night or so, I put my daughter to bed and, we play games and, it's just kind of fun. I bring up my phone and we play some little games on the phone and that's it. But, recently, not that long ago, there was this game that was like really, really fun. And so after I put her to bed, I played it some more. And, then I put it down and, the next day I played it a little bit more. Then I played it a little bit more and I played it a little bit more. And after a couple weeks, I was playing this like an hour a day. And the identity of a productive, responsible business owner who's growing by leaps and bounds started to feel like it wasn't real anymore. Now, by the way, there was just that one tentacle of distraction, right? Of just doing something that was, not really a worthwhile activity as a mature, responsible individual who's growing his business and his economics, etc. But it started to cut into important elements of my life, number one. And number two, I allowed that to happen, right? That was a short-term action. It was a short-term focus. It was contextual belief, like, hey, this is more fun than that. It was values, rather just have some short-term dopamine versus doing something that's redeeming for myself and my life and my family. And so the short-term tentacles all of a sudden started to wag the dog and started to take on a different identity. Like, this is, I'm not very successful and, I'm not worthy and all these kind of things. But as soon as that happened, this identity luckily was strong enough of being a successful business owner who's a leader and who's a role model for others and who's disciplined and all these other things that I finally said, you know what, I got to cut that tentacle off. And I just erased the game, right? Game's gone, different context, right? Different people and places. All of a sudden, no problem. It's all handled. Now, again, it's you can't always go cold turkey with different actions and tentacles that you do. That was an easy one for me. But the reason why I did that, where initially it was like, well, I'm going to lose something from that, from not getting my time just having fun, or what I thought was just fun, I had to appreciate that was in massive conflict with my identity as to who I decided that I was for years and years and years. And so because there was a conflict with my identity, I cut it off. There's other people that you're going to coach that kind of thing for them, like a distraction or a drug or a friend or, an affair, right? All sorts of different things that they and are not going to work for them if they're actually going to reach the goals that they have. They don't have an identity that creates a conflict for them, and so they'll allow those things into their life. Or they'll have allowed those things for so long that they've now started to formulate a new identity for themselves. And the work that I did with Sally, so to speak, was work to get these tentacles in line with a new identity, so now I can kind of sell her on that, where she could actually believe that identity is real. I'll give you one more example on the reverse of this, rather than starting from the bottom up, going from the top down. And this is an individual I've started coaching recently, last 6 months or so. And his goal that he shared with me the first time I ever talked to him was, Jeff, I want to go from ashes to victory. I want to go from ashes to victory. I literally wrote this down. It's in my notes, right? And so, talking to him in more detail about this, he is explaining that, his life right now is one where he doesn't feel very successful. He is attempting to make some businesses work out financially at a really high level, but he can already tell that he's not disciplined in his endeavor and that he doesn't, the ideas that he has, he won't take certain risks. He won't move forward. He's split in 10 different directions. There's all these problems, right? So he describes his life right now like he's in ashes, right? And I asked him, I said, do you, do you know why you feel that way? Because you've had a lot of success in your past. And he said, yeah, I've been very successful in my past. I sold a huge computer business in Latin America. I made, tens of millions of dollars in that deal. A very, very successful negotiator and businessman. And literally, I mean, this gentleman is still worth like about $10 million. Okay. And he's describing his life like my life is in ashes. That's his global belief about his life, right? My life is in ashes. Not just, right now I'm taking a break, or right now I'm not doing very well in my businesses. No, my life is in ashes. It's like a global belief that he has, right? And so I talked to him about this. I said, well, why is your life in ashes? And he said, well, because I've failed. I failed in this restaurant I started. I failed in this real estate transaction. I lost like almost $1 million in the stock market recently. I've failed. So, my life is in ashes. I want to go to victory. Why am I not in victory right now? Help me, Jeff, coach me to transform this. And so I talked to him about all these failures, and I said, you know what? You've lost a lot. And I know it's painful for you, but you need to appreciate that, losing is very valuable for you, because if all you did was win, you wouldn't value winning. If you didn't have losses, you wouldn't have any pain to learn from. And so those losses have been painful. But what did you learn from those things? And he said, well, in the stock market, I learned this and this and this. And I learned that you really have to be dedicated, and it's a tough game, and you have to do good asset allocation. I said, what did you learn from the restaurant? He said, well, I learned that, if you're an absentee owner, that you're going to have trouble continuing to make money in a variety of environments, and you really ought to just sell. And I kept asking him about all these lessons that he learned from these supposed failures that were so painful for him. And he realized at the end of that conversation, I have actually gotten a lot of value from those failures, because I told him, I said, your job is to take all those things that were so painful, where you lost so much money, and make them worth way more money to you in the future. I said, when you lost the $1 million in the stock market, that loss right there has a $10 million value for you, because you will either save or make another $10 million in your life if you actually live your life from the lessons you learned from that. That's the value of those losses. And he really had trouble getting his head around it. He's like, Jeff, how is it that losing is good? I mean, he really felt losing was like the Antichrist, right? It was like kryptonite for him. And so finally, as he started to get this, he had a different way of describing where he was in his life. He was no longer talking about it as if it was ashes. He was talking about it like he's learned some amazing lessons, and he's gotten to the point where he's prepared. He's prepared for this new launch to greatness. And all these lessons and all these challenges and all these failures have led him to this point where he's now capable. I told him that. I said, you weren't even capable of doing what you want to do now. You weren't even capable of that before. Now at least you're capable, because you've learned so much, because you've had so many challenges. I mean, that's the only thing that makes it possible for you to actually get what you could actually create today. And so within that realization, he has now a different global belief about life, about losing, about failure, and about what that makes possible in his actions and short-term focus. And I just talked to him the other day on another coaching session, and he's talking about how he's negotiating this deal with a big tenant that's going to rent real estate from him for like millions of dollars a year. And he's just got these tremendous things that he's doing now, and he's on a new trajectory. He's cutting losses, he's learning from them, and he's moving on. He wasn't doing that before. The reason he wasn't because he didn't understand the actions he needed to take, or a good strategy. Like, I wasn't like business strategy coach with him, right? I just had to help him change his global beliefs about who he was in respect to his life and his business, those contexts, those people and places. And now everything is changing as a result of that for him. So that's more of a top-down explanation. Does that make sense? So there's different ways that you can come at this with different clients, depending on their situation, depending on the challenges they face. And you just got to decide which way do you need to approach it. So I'm going to give you some nuts and bolts now. We've covered a lot of concept and a lot of kind of examples. Let's get into the nuts and bolts and the how-to of this. I'm not going to go too deep with this today because I really wanted this to be more of a big picture way to conceptualize what we do as strategy coaches as we help our clients change their mindsets, okay? But wrote out for you a little bit of what I call a change map. And there's 3 different aspects to this map. It's not too complicated. You have your client's current state, their desired state, and then their ideal state, okay? Now, these states could be different elements. They could be mindsets, they could be emotions, they could be ways of being in their life. They could be roles that they take on in their life. So, think of these in multiple contexts, okay? However, in these different states, each of these different states that they're after can be analogized, so to speak, or could be explained in lieu of their identity, their global beliefs, the people and places in their life, their context, their actions, their short-term focus, their values, and their contextual beliefs as well. So in their current life, they can actually explain probably a lot of this to you, or you could at least intuit it or gather it. In their desired state, there's some of this that you may be able to understand quite quickly, and some of it might take some digging, right? And then there's their ideal state. And their ideal state, they probably aren't even aware of at this point. The desired state they can talk about, like, hey, these are my goals, this is who I want to be, that kind of thing. But their ideal state, usually the desired state is based upon like an idea of total perfection and some utopia idea of themselves, others, and life that will never ever manifest and probably would be quite destructive if they achieved only that, right? But the ideal state is the true ideal that you can be aware of coming from a 50,000-foot view, looking at their life and their mindset and who they are, what their tendencies are, who's around them, what their context is, like really what's ideal for them in the short and long term. Okay, so current and desired, they usually have a really good idea of. Ideal, that they usually have no clue. Think of this as their blind spot. And you're going to need to fill that in or support them in getting a handle on it. That's why a coach has to show up and they can't just do this reading a book. Okay, so this is the map of change, and you want to like write these down when you get a new client. Start filling in the blanks. Start filling in identities, global beliefs that they have, actions they take, etc. And they're going to tell you all about their life. So a lot of that is stuff that you could just jot down, and now you have a sense of what their current state is. At least, especially the aspects of their current state that they would like to change, that they desire to eliminate or decrease or get away from, right? So you want to know what these are. And then you can also discover their desired state and get a sense of that. And then you can move from there. Now, in each of these areas, you're going to need to discover some things before you take action on actually changing a client. And then you're going to need to take some action and have some communication with their client to actually cause some movement from A to B or A to C. Okay? So let's start with square one, the phase where you discover these elements. So I wrote this down in these different areas. So for their current state, you're just going to ask, right? Ask them all these. Like, who do you believe you are in life? Like, what's your most important role? What do you think about people or money or business or work or career or health? Like, just generalized global beliefs. Like, who's most important to you in your life? Who would you get to hang out with on a regular basis? By the way, each of these, again, you can ask the desired questions as well. Who would you like to be in your life? How would you like to think about people, women, men, money, etc.? How would you like it to be? Who would you want to be around, right? How would you like to transform those relationships to be different for yourself, right? You're at same stuff, right? Same area, just different question to get the desired state versus the current state, right? Places where you hang out right now, where are you from, where would you like to be, right? A lot of these are just straight goal questions, right? Some of them are a little bit more esoteric. Actions, where do you focus, like short-term focus, right? What are you up to? What are you doing in your life right now? Doing a little bit of wheel of life work. Where would you like that to be, right? What would you like to be focused on? What's most important to you in your life? That's a values question. What would you like to make most important to you in your life? What would you like to prioritize above that? How would you like to change that? And again, contextual beliefs will happen in context of different, usually goal conversations like, hey, my goal is make $1 million. What do you believe about that? I believe this and this and this. All of a sudden you got contextual beliefs about their career, their work, or their job, or their business, etc. Just like I mentioned a second ago with that client example. So you're going to ask all these things. That's why it says ask here. Ask, 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 ask. You're going to ask about the head. You're going to ask about the tentacles. Everything above here is head. Everything below here is tentacles, right? So from the top down or from the bottom up, you can ask all these questions. That's up to your style. By the time you ask a lot of questions, you're going to have filled in these blanks. It's all going to get filled in, or a lot of it's going to get filled in. That's not hard. That is not hard to do. Any idiot can do that. Then from there, you're going to do two different things to actually cause change. And I suggest you do it in this order, where you first ask these elements and then you start to provoke these other two actions afterwards. If you don't ask and understand your client first, just beating them up with these other things, it's not going to be pretty. They're not going to appreciate that, right? So start by asking, start by trying to understand, and then try to help them as a great coach would. And the two different ways I'm going to suggest you do that is, number one, help them understand their blind spot by looking at these elements in an ideal way. What is the ideal identity? What's the ideal global belief? What's the ideal people and places? What are the ideal actions for them, knowing who they are? And in that case, you're probably going to need to challenge them or confront them, right? This is going to be where you're going to really need to serve your clients in a way that they're not necessarily going to be comfortable with or like to hear from you, right? This is not the most friendly part of the conversation a lot of times, because you really got to serve them, okay? So sometimes I'll say things like, do you know why I have to tell you this? This is the reason why I have to take this time to talk to you about this on this coaching session, because you don't get it. You don't get your blind spot. You don't get your ideal identity. You don't get, like I was talking to a client the other day. I'm just triggered to think about this because I literally said this to her, who was just slaving away at a job so she could have some political points with a particular educational institution so she could eventually, like, someday be involved in research because she needs those local resources, she believes, at least, right? And she's just going through hell to do that, as if this is the only place she can work or the only people that research in this particular area of science, right? I mean, it's just insane. I mean, it sounds insane to me, at least, right? But, she had a really, clear idea that I have to go through this, she's being like not treated well by her employer, right? Just going through hell. And she doesn't need it. Like, she's got an inheritance. She doesn't have to work for money if she doesn't want to. She's got all sorts of jobs she could do. She's got a great lifestyle, but not so much now because she's got this horrid job that she thinks she has to do because it's a top-down kind of, it's a more abusive atmosphere, if you will. So, and I told her the other day, I said, you don't have to do any of this. You could find ways to get research and going through the back door or influencing other people or, approaching maybe a different institution or, maybe you could do it passively and not be directly involved and find other resources and other ways that you can actually be involved and enjoy your life. And she literally, the reason I told this to her, because I was questioning that. And she said, you know what? I just went on vacation the other day and I read some journal entries and the scientific literature, and I just had a great time. I'd be happy just doing that. I said, are you sure? Are you sure you don't have to achieve all these things and slave for all these people? And she said, you know what? I guess I don't really need to do that. And so I confronted her and challenged her with the ideal identity, which is not this wage slave. The ideal global belief, which is, hey, I can live the life I want and still enjoy a contribution to society, in a way that constitutes who I really am and my genius, right? People and places. I could have different people and places with me. By the way, her desired outcomes in terms of those elements did not include these things. I mean, at least a lot of them, right? So I had to challenge her with that. I said, hey, you know what? The reason I have to tell you that, like, we have to take session time to discuss this is because you don't get it. You don't see that you could actually have a different life at this point. So I couldn't be like her buddy at that point and just kind of placate her mindset about this stuff. And by the way, this is like 5th, 6th session with her where I've asked and asked and asked and asked, and I'm discovering the way her world is. So then I can see the blind spot because I have her idea, her blueprint, her experience of life, but I also have my own in the same moment. And everyone that I've ever, role modeled and looked into and been inspired by as well. So I know other possibilities. I know she knows some of those possibilities too, but she's not acting them out. Therefore, she can't even bring up in conversation the ideal, right? Or she does it, but only hypothetically in a dream rather than in real action, right? In the tentacles, so to speak. So that's where the challenge comes in. So that's the first way. After you've asked, challenge and confront with the blind spot of what's the real change that they need to make that would be ideal for them, knowing what you know and what you've gathered from them that they don't maybe agree with or see or experience or believe at this point. And then second, or third, depending on what order you do it in, whatever current state they're in around these different elements, the head and the tentacles, you're going to coach and motivate and support them to get to their desired state. Or you're going to coach, motivate, and support them to get to the ideal state, or both, because a lot of times the desired state is on the way to ideal. Not always, but it can be, right? So that would be second or third. First, ask and find out what's going on in all these areas. Second, coach and motivate them towards those desired and ideal areas. And then third or second, challenge and confront them about their blind spot and what's ideal that you see that they don't see. What do you see that they don't see? And this is where experience and your greatness as a coach and your mastery as a coach really comes in, because there's things that you need to be able to see in them or in their life that they can't even fathom, so you can truly bring something to the table in terms of developing an ideal change that they'd like to make and that they understand they need to make as well. So that's it. It's really just 3 different elements. It's discovering these things, moving them from A to B to C, and also discussing what the blind spot and ideal point C actually is. Make sense? Questions, hit me up in the comments. But that's the overall map for this. So when I can discover what all these elements are, and I already kind of demonstrated that a little bit, I can now work with you and coach you to go from a loser to a winner, or from the lovable loser to the wise sage, right? Or believing that money is evil to money is a means to modify and expand and increase our experience of life and maximize our lives, or to contribute even more to society and ourselves, right? Or changing people, places, things. You get the idea, right? Like, these are all conversations that can occur. So, final piece here, now that we've really beat this horse to death, is that these elements here, can I stick this below? I know you're not going to see all of it, but this change map, this is going to be told in a variety of different ways. And sometimes your client will tell you and they'll be pitching to you. Sometimes you're going to be telling them and they'll be catching. There's going to be a pitch and catch, a give and take that happens here. So all those elements, the identity, the beliefs, the places, the actions, etc., they're going to be told in logic and facts, like this is the way it is now, right? Or the way it needs to be in the future. They're going to be told in stories, like I am this character and this is what I've lived and this is what I'd like to live, the drama in the story. They're going to be told in metaphors, like my client that said, he's in ashes and soon he'll be in victory. It's more the metaphor of being in the ashes and being the phoenix. Or concepts, like a concept or a mindset of depression or anxiety or joy or love, right? These are like emotions, concepts, kind of characterizations, if you will. Stories and concepts usually are kissing cousins. Like there's a story behind it, and then there's the kind of the finalization of the concept as well. But usually concepts don't have much of a plot to them, right? That's how we can determine the difference between those two. So when you're talking to your client about their actions or their short-term focus or their contextual beliefs or their values or their context or their global beliefs or their identity, it's discussed in these different areas. And so when you ask them about them, they'll listen for these. Oh, they've got this story. Oh, okay, they've got some facts there. I need to put those facts down. Or they have this metaphor, ashes. Or they've got this concept of depression, right? And then about the goals, same thing. Well, they have the story of the victory or the story, the metaphor of dominating the marketplace or whatever, right? And then you can also offer them new metaphors, new concepts, new stories, new logic and facts from your own context. Whether it's by discussing the ideal, I think this is still on the frame. So the ideal, the blind spot, and what's missing for them, or just the desired outcome and what this might look like, how that story might play out for them, how the logic and facts might actually play out for them. So as a coach, hopefully you have the experience and the expertise, but also the conceptual understanding and artistry within you to discuss all these different elements and be able to piece together the actions and the mindset and the identity and the people, all those different elements, to construct that. And with experience and with more clients that you work with, obviously this gets better and better. So that's it for today. That is the map of how people change, or why people change, if you will, from the big picture perspective. And for those of you in Strategy Immersion Training, when we talk about level 3, 4, and 5, especially 4 and 5 of mastery of change, changing for the long term, changing when you're not even there, causing long-term change in your clients. This is the kind of stuff we're talking about. Working with somebody on their identity, their life story, their global beliefs, their global metaphors. These are elements that you need to be able to work within and be facile in, and we'll be demonstrating that very soon if we haven't already in your training. So with that said, make sure you do your homework on this stuff and practice it and listen to other people telling these stories and facts and concepts in these different areas. See the demonstrations that we have in the training. If you're not in training, I'll put a link so you can learn more about them. Also, if you're on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe. This will get this out to you more often, not to mention others more often that want to hear this kind of stuff. And I will see you next week in week 4 of Strategy Immersion Training. Take care until then.